Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you. This is part 2 of our World Religion series we're doing this July. It's called Many Paths, One Door. Last week we started it was 4th of July, so of course we're going to talk about the United States of America, Independence Day, and we talked about what is our American faith tradition, and we really determined that it is to be plural. There's not a state religion in this country, and there never has been. It's always been founded on the idea of freedom, that every individual is free to express and explore their own path with the infinite. And that separation, that the state's not going to get involved and tell us how it ought to be. And then today we're going to go a little bit further into the exploration of that freedom, and we're going to begin to go into the 5 great world religions. Today I'm going to be talking about the children of Abraham, the Abrahamic path, as we call it. No, that's not what we call it. The Abrahamic faiths. I'm getting my pronunciation of my ahs and a's mixed up. You know what I'm talking about. And then next week I'm going to be talking about the 2 major religions from the East, although in some experts, now that Jill Carroll has a new book out called World Religions, A Beginner's Guide, and she lists 7, and she includes Taoism and Sikhism as well, but we're going to be working next week with Hinduism and Buddhism. But before we get into all this stuff, I just want to share some wisdom that comes from Instagram, those social media. So the point is just to notice what's happening in the world and then to remark on it. So one user named Jenny Hogan said, "Eating sugar will only make you feel good for a few minutes, as opposed to not eating sugar, which will make you feel good for 0 minutes." So take that as you will. So I'm not a world religions expert, but I am a student. I have been studying other faith paths besides the one that I grew up in for, almost 30 years now. And particularly in seminary, we had a deep study of the great faiths of the world. And I've always been interested in it because there's only one God. And that one presence, one spirit, one divine mind and intelligence speaks to people differently and yet the same. There are universal truths that are revealed in all of these faith traditions. So I'm interested in that, what is called the perennial truth, and our founders, the Fillmores, were also interested in this from the beginning. And the New Thought movement really could not have occurred in any other place but the United States of America because of this freedom of worship. And in the 1800s, people were exploring not just our Christian tradition, which this country has predominantly in our culture, but also those Eastern traditions. And to see how does God speak to humanity? In what ways because I would tell you, if you get something that's spoken like the Golden Rule in all the world traditions, you want to pay attention because God is speaking to all people. And we're all picking up this universal truth. So unity occupies a unique space. We are largely Christian in origin and culture, but we have been students of the principles that underlie all religions from our inception. We look to Jesus of Nazareth as our primary teacher, and philosophically, we are actually more aligned with the Eastern traditions, particularly Hinduism. We're more aligned with that than we are with the religion Christianity that was formed about Jesus after his time on earth, and here's why. I believe Jesus was a non-dual teacher. And if you look particularly at the Sermon on the Mount, it is a high teaching. Matthew 5, the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall see God. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. That's the one I wanted to talk about today. What does that even mean? But there is a deep teaching on all of those. Poor in spirit is something that we can't even quite get our heads around. See, Jesus was speaking from this level of such oneness that he often confused his disciples, disrupted their thinking. And a lot of the teaching that he offered was beyond the rules of the tradition in which he grew up, in the Jewish tradition. It's love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that is in the Jewish tradition. Jesus said, yeah, but I'm going to tell you to go further. Love your enemy. People's heads just about blew off their shoulders. I mean, you can't do that. What does that mean, love your enemy? That was what Jesus was doing. See, he was calling people to this high consciousness beyond creed, beyond religion, beyond differences of absolute oneness with God. This is called non-duality. And I'm so grateful to be a part of a tradition called unity, called New Thought, which we place our ideal there. There is only one life, one presence, one power, one mind, one source of all that is. And we are not separate from it in any way. Only in our thoughts have we convinced ourselves that God is not present everywhere, including in me and in my life. But the religions that came up after the religion, Christianity, the parts of Jesus' teachings they couldn't understand or fully live into, they just sort of kind of put that aside, and then they built a lot of rules and a lot of us and them. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today, is that we're going to compare and contrast the teaching, the essence of Jesus, and also the tradition from which he came and the traditions that came after him. So for this series, particularly this week and next week, I'm going back to my standard that I use for world religion study, and that's Houston Smith's World Religions. Many of you probably study it in college. It's used still as the textbook for world religions courses all over. And also Jill's new book, which is World Religion for Beginners. And today we're going to be talking about the three faiths that share a common root: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So I'm going to give you some of the facts and figures about it. Before I do that, we're going to actually go into this quote from Mark Nepo, which I loved. And so, it is the risk to be fully present that opens us to oneness. The oneness that flows through all things. The way a brook flows from your acre through my fence, through my land, and on through my neighbor's fence and their land. And just as that rush of water ignores all that we have built in between, so the wholeness of life moves through us all, undermining all the walls we maintain. So everything we're going to say today, I just want you to hold that idea, that all of the world's faith traditions sought to tap into the river of life that is God. And they did build fences and said, no, this is the way it is, and this is what we understand. Actually, it reminds me of a metaphor that Jesse Jennings taught. He's the spiritual leader up in Spring at Creative Life Center, and I took a class with him in ministerial school. And he said, this is the way religions start. See, Joe was out by the river praying one day, and it was just a perfect morning. And as he was praying, he opened his eyes and the light hit the water. And he had this moment of transcendent reality. His heart burst with the fullness of the presence of God. He was changed by that moment. And he couldn't help but talk about it. And so he goes back and he tells his friends and family. And his brother said, where were you standing? What were you wearing? How were you holding your hands? Like that? And that's how religions get born. From a true experience of the divine, then other people seek to recreate it, and they put all of the trappings around it. There's the esoteric and the exoteric, but that's another thing for another time. Judaism began around 4,000 years ago. Of the 5 or 7 great religious faiths, it is the smallest by far. It's less than 0.2% of the population. The reason it's considered one of the great faiths is because it birthed the 2 largest religions in the world, which are Christianity and Islam. And not only that, but because of its impact. And the 2 great gifts from the Jewish tradition are monotheism and covenant. The Jewish faith was the first theology to say one God, not many, not the God of lightning and the God of, that was Thor, wasn't it? That was another tradition, but not all of these different deities in competition, they're basically just people in the sky, dysfunctional family if you read your Greek mythology. No, for these ancient people, and in Jill's book she says that it's not clear whether or not they were monotheistic in the beginning. When you think about the great commandment, have no other gods before me, it doesn't say there are no other gods but me. So in the early religion, it's somewhat distinguished from what is now called Judaism, the religion of the early Israelites. But something got formed, something came out that said there is one God. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. One of the most famous prayers in Hebrew. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God. Christianity began 2,000 years ago, the largest religion in the world. Almost a third of all people living are of the Christian faith or raised in a Christian faith, 32%. The deep gifts, I believe, of Christianity, well, and here's where we're going to explore a little bit later. If we really focus on the teachings of Jesus, we are ushered into a new paradigm of relationship with the divine. And it is one, as Julia sang about, it is this deep experience of the kingdom of heaven is within. This is the great gift of Jesus' teachings, but I have to distinguish because that is not really the religion. That's not what people focused on when they built the religion after Jesus' time on earth. But there are still great gifts, even in the dualistic religion that was formed after him. And I believe one of the great gifts of Christianity is that it brought to the world not only the monotheism that we inherited from our Jewish brothers and sisters and ancestors, but this idea that we can be in deep personal relationship with God. This is a great gift to the world. A great gift. And then about 1,400 years ago, the third of these Abrahamic paths was created, Islam. It's the second largest religion in the world. About 28% of the human population on earth today practice Islam or are part of Islamic culture. It's said that the keynote for Islam is submission of your will to God's will. That was the main message, that is to surrender your own personal, egoic, separate will into the will of the divine, which is for love, which is for peace, which is for good. You know, all three of these religions worship the same God. I don't know if you knew that or not. That in Islam, Allah, it's actually, it literally means God, but in the way it's formed in Arabic, it means the God. The God, not just God, but the God. One life, one presence, one source of all. Not only did Islam bring us this gift of submitting our will to the higher will, but they gave us many other gifts as well. A few months ago, I saw on one of the social media sites, somebody put a poll out there. Do you think in America we should be teaching Arabic numerals to our children? And of course people went, no, that's terrible. We shouldn't be doing that. And you know that our numbers are Arabic numerals. It's because Islam gave us math and astronomy and global navigation. There was a period in Moorish Spain when all three of these faith traditions lived together in harmony. There was no conflict between the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims. And of course, we know that story didn't last, did it? And Spain has a horrific history. The Spanish Inquisition, where the Catholic Church tortured and murdered millions of Jews and Muslims and other heathens. So as we really, if you want like a 30,000-foot view of these religions to get more information about them, Jill's book is amazing. I'm going to give you like a 20-mile view today. Really, we're not going to go into any more detail than that, just to see these are the largest strokes possible from these three great faiths. Barbara Brown Taylor has a book that I've also been dipping into. It's called Holy Envy, in which she's a wonderful, wonderful Episcopal priest and a college professor in Georgia, and she teaches world religions. And she wrote this book called Holy Envy about her experience of teaching this class to undergraduates. And this is from her book. By the time the students have finished 6 classes on Islam, they know how much Jews, Christians, and Muslims have in common. Not just Abraham, but Moses, the commandments, the prophets, the holy city of Jerusalem, charity, fasting, pilgrimage, prayer, sacred text, sacred washing, justice, free will, care for neighbors, angels, the coming Messiah, the day of judgment, the resurrection of the dead, and sooner or later participation in the eternal life of the one God. Everything on that long list belongs at the center of what these three religions share. I know. You'd think we'd get along a little better, wouldn't you? That is a lot of shared theology. That is a lot of shared spiritual practice and understanding. So why don't the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims just hold hands and sing, "Let there be peace on earth," like we do here in Unity? What's the deal? Well, Barbara has something to say about that too. She says the Abrahamic traditions belong to a complicated blended family. That's the word right there. You know, you have a family, right? You know how these dysfunctional things happen. A complicated blended family in which our similarities provoke as much friction as our differences. That's the crux of it. You know, the greatest trouble where different groups of people get together is when they live close to each other, where those differences rub. And you know, you spot it. This is projection. I talked about it last week. You spot it, you got it. The thing you don't like in that other religion, take a look at your own. And particularly in the conflictual relationships between these three great faith paths. So I'm going to turn the corner here a little bit in today's message. We're going to get really personal here in a minute. But I want to talk a little bit more conceptual here about oneness and duality, but really it's us and them. Groupishness, as Barbara Brown Taylor calls it in her book. I like to be a part of a good group, don't you? I love being a part of Unity. I'm an Astros fan, even though that's kind of controversial outside of Houston right now. I like rooting for the team, especially when we win. Isn't it great? You know, I don't know. This is an evolutionary process. This idea of oneness, according to spiral dynamics, which we did our January series on, cannot be fully embodied in human consciousness till what Wilber calls third tier. The idea of even any kind of coexistence can't exist until like level 4 of first tier because we're so groupish. You are my people and those are not my people. Look at what they're wearing. Look at the way they use words. Look at how they pray. Look where they go. They're not like us. I grew up in a town, 100% Christian, but there were 3 churches. We had the Holy Rollers, the House of Prayer Pentecostal Church. We had the Southern Baptist Church. We had the Methodist. And the Gotts were in all 3. We had members of our family in all 3. And all of us were like, well, they're not quite doing it right, are they? I mean, we shared 100% of theology the same. Different places, finding the us and the them. This is what we as humans do at certain levels of evolution. In Christianity, there are those in the group, the saved, the redeemed, and then there are the unsaved, those outside. In old maps, particularly from the era of colonialism, you'll see on a map they'll have whole swaths of the world's population just labeled as heathen. All of Asia, heathen. Yeah, this is the history in Christianity of the us and the them. And how do you treat people if you don't think of them as being quite as good as you? Think about that. Think about what our Native American people here on this continent experienced. That they're heathens. It doesn't matter. They don't matter as much. This is what the us-them consciousness will do. In Muslims, there are those who are good Muslims who observe the 5 pillars of Islam, and then there are infidels, those who are unfaithful to God, who will not submit to God the way we say you ought to submit to God. In Judaism, there is the Gentiles, the Goyim. I will say that the Jews don't quite have as much, because their whole teaching on the afterlife and heaven and hell is not at all the focus. In Judaism, the focus is really on how do we live the best life now. And there is actually a place in Jewish teaching for the righteous Gentile. Don't you wish that there was some of that in Christianity and in Judaism and in Islam, that we could have a place, okay, you're not following the rules just as we think you should, but you're still all right. There's a funny story of a Jewish theologian. And you know the passage in John where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. This is a very controversial scripture. And it all comes down to, what do you think Jesus meant when he said, I? But this Jewish theologian, she told this story. She's like, I can just see myself getting to the pearly gates. And then people are up there for St. Peter, and he's like, okay, did you do it right? Which church did you go to? Okay, you can come in. It's really crowded and busy, and there's a lot of noise. And I see Jesus over behind the gates just waving at me, so I just walk right on through. And then Peter says, Jesus, she's not following the rules. And he said, no, it's okay. She's okay by me. There is no way to the Father except by me. And Jesus on the other side of heaven's wall saying, she's okay by me. If we could just gain a little bit more of that. Yeah, they're not doing it right by what I was taught, but they're okay by me. If we begin to look into the heart rather than the differences. It's a product of evolution. It's a product of spiritual growth and becoming. That the more we grow and heal, the less we need to exclude. The more we can open our arms to embrace our common humanity. We're all brothers and sisters. Each of us is one. In the Gospel of Thomas, which was one of those beautiful pieces of writing found in the Nag Hammadi literature that was found in the 1940s or 50s, it was a branch of early Christianity, the first 200 or 300 years, called Gnosticism, that was then rooted out by a lot of murder and a lot of nefarious doings. But almost all biblical scholars now do accept that these teachings found in the Gospel of Thomas and some of the other writings are authentic to Jesus of Nazareth. And this is from Thomas. Jesus said, those who seek should not stop seeking until they find, and when they find, they will be disturbed. And when they are disturbed, they will wonder and will rule over all. That teaching was found in some of the other Gospels. Seek and ye shall find. But in Thomas it goes further. Seek until you find, and then you're going to be troubled by what you find, because it may not fit with your paradigm of what you thought the world was, who you thought God was, how you thought we were supposed to pray and gather. The more we seek, the larger we have to become. And if we will let ourselves be disturbed by the things that don't fit in our images of what we think God ought to be or what religion ought to be, if we let that disturbance move us, we will find that we're in a place of wonder. Guess what? God's bigger than you were taught in Sunday school. God is bigger. There's more of God's love available for us all. We can move into this greater realm of wonder and marvel. And it says, only when we're there will we rule. And we're not ruling over because the wonder has moved us into it. I was 19 years old, a sophomore at Oral Roberts University, which is also Jill Carroll's alma mater. She was there a few years before me. I didn't know her then. And my certainty in my Christian faith was coming apart right before me. I saw some weird stuff when I was there, I'll just tell you. I was there when Oral said that if he didn't get $8.5 million in donations by the end of the year, God was going to kill him. Do y'all remember that? I was there in the chapel service when he said it. And it took months for that to kind of get out into the news media. But I went to lunch with my friends afterwards, like, did you hear what he said? He said God's going to kill him if he doesn't get $8.5 million. He got the last $2.5 million from a dog track owner in Florida. Old Florida. Well, I had been brought up to be a good Christian boy, and it was my hideout. Because I knew I was gay from the time I was 10, and there was just no place for that in that world, so I could just hide and be the best little boy in the world. And the girls I dated, their moms knew they didn't have anything to worry about with me. Because I was such a good Christian. It's true. But then my sophomore year, about 19, it all sort of I began to talk about what was really happening with me. And I remember lying on my dorm room bed, and it was an afternoon during the week. It was between classes. And just being so confused, so troubled. And I had this thought about who's really going to go to heaven according to what I've been taught. Because I had been taught that not only did you need to say the sinner's prayer, to accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, that also had to be evidenced by the speaking of tongues. And so that wasn't that many people. So when they said a third of the world is Christian, no, not by my standards. And the standards of the churches I grew up in, no. Catholics, I love you, but no. No. Mormons, no. Sorry, you're not doing it right. This is what I grew up in. And I just remember having this thought, like, the numbers are not good for heaven. Like, I didn't know this at the time, but there have been 100 billion living human beings in our species' history. And so if you throw out all the ones before Jesus, because, sorry for your timing. And then, the ones who never heard about him, yep, sorry, can't help you there. And then you just have the ones who were exposed to Jesus' teachings, but they didn't say it the right way, and they didn't do it. It would be such a tiny, tiny percentage, like 0.00001% of all humankind were going to go to heaven, and the rest would be damned for eternal damnation and punishment. And I just remember lying there going, that can't be right. That can't be right. I mean, I'm only 19, and I'm not like that smart, but I'm like, I probably said a bad word in my head. Like, that is a messed up system. What kind of a loving God creates that system? What kind of a loving Father creates billions of human souls, just commit them to eternal punishment? And I was going to be one because of how I'm wired to love. And something in me said, no, that can't be right. And I've described it like pulling a thread on a sweater. Have you ever done that? Don't do it, Elizabeth. Because the whole thing will just start coming unraveled. And that's how my Christian faith happened. And I began to question so much, and I was disturbed and troubled. Because I had certainty in that faith. And now I was so unsure. I didn't know what to believe. But I had a prayer. My prayer was like, God, show me. Show me what's right. Show me. Guide me. And I didn't know that guidance would take me through 9 years of alcoholism. But hey, that's where I did my deepest spiritual work. My deepest surrender, my deepest need for the grace of God came in that time. And eventually found my way to a New Thought church. And nobody was saying that message to me anymore. Nobody was telling me that anyone was going to hell. I mean, I was a little suspicious of them for that, because I think, are they a good church if they're not sending people to hell? The conditioning was still there. It took some time. If you're new to Unity, and this feels troubling, you might want to go back to, you might have the desire to go back to a faith with more sure laws and rules and construction of the universe, and you are welcome to do what feels right for your soul. But I invite you to stick around and let that disturbance move you. Let that disturbance enlarge you. And I have a feeling at some point the wonder may drop in when you're least expecting it. Mary Oliver, one of my favorite poets, writes this: I wanted to thank the mockingbird for the vigor of his song. Every day he sang from the rim of the field while I picked blueberries or just idled in the sun. Every day he came fluttering by to show me, and why not, the white blossoms of his wings. So one day I went there with a machine and played some songs of Mahler. The mockingbird stopped singing. He came close and seemed to listen. Now, when I go down to the field, a little Mahler spills through the sputters of his song. How happy I am, lounging in the light, listening as the music floats by. And I give thanks also for my mind that thought of giving that gift. And mostly, I'm grateful that I take this world so seriously. We live in such confused times. We can be a gift. This church, this teaching. We can be part of the disturbance and part of the wonder. And you are invited to participate in the glorious song of Spirit as it is unfolding all around us. I invite you to pray with me now. So God, we open to you. We let our uncertainty guide us forward into trust and wonder. Knowing that when we have it all figured out, we have tried to box you in. And you are truly infinite, and there are no boundaries or borders that will contain you. And so each of us individually, and we collectively as a community, we open to the uncertainty of what is coming and who you are even. And we open to the wonder of our becoming. As our hearts grow and grow in you, you grow and grow in us. And we shine with the light that Jesus said. He said, don't you know you are the light of the world? And we say, yes, we are. Move in us, God. Shine in us. Guide us. Reveal yourself in us today. We pray this in the name and the nature of the eternal Christ. Amen. If no one has told you today you're the light of the world, I'm here to tell you, you are the light of the world. God bless you. Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.